class, now that you've done with reading The Sufferings of Young Werther by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, I would like to talk in this lecture about the significance of the Sturm und Drang. The original title of the book that you've been reading is Die Leiden des jungen Werthers, translated into English in some versions as The Sufferings of Young Werther or The Sorrow of Young Werther. The first published in 1774 at the book fair in Leipzig, and it made Goethe become famous overnight, and it is one of the most successful novels in the history of German literature. Before that, Goethe had written poems and a drama called Götz von Berlichingen in 1771. And by Werther, he became world famous, however. Götz von Berlichingen had a national success, and Werther was his second success, but it made him internationally famous. The epoch of the Enlightenment was in the 18th century and can be divided into three different sections in some works on literary history. The early Enlightenment from 1680 to 1740, and the middle Enlightenment from about 1740 to 1770, and the late Enlightenment from 1780 to 1785. Throughout the Enlightenment, however, there were a variety of literary trends that existed in part in parallel. First of all, there was the Empfindsamkeit literary period, which is translated into English as sentimentality or sensitivity, 1740 to 1780. And in the second half of the 18th century, there was the literary trend called Sturm und Drang, and this is what we want to talk about today. And after that is the Deutsche Klassik. So Goethe's The Sufferings of Young Werther belongs to Sturm und Drang, and Faust is a part of partially Sturm und Drang and partially Klassik. So the question is, what led to Sturm und Drang? These are the influences: Pietism, Klopstock, Shakespeare, and Rousseau. Let's go over each of them. So for a long time, the Enlightenment flourished and science flourished based on strict perusal of reason. But then a movement in complete opposition to the emphasis of reason sprang up on the scene, and this was back to feeling, was suddenly the motto around 1770. Some of the Enlightenment poets and thinkers had gone too far and became pretty repetitious or ossified. So the eminent German poet who celebrated sensibility rather than sense is Klopstock, Friedrich Gottlieb Klopstock. He's an important figure because he was the pioneer of Sturm und Drang. And he says that a poet is committed in a very special way to feeling and not only to reason. And he was inspired by Pietism. Pietism was a religious movement in the Lutheran Church. So, according to Merriam-Webster definition, it's a 17th century religious movement originating in Germany in reaction to formalism and intellectualism, and stressing Bible study and personal religious experience. Another definition from Britannica: Pietism is an influential religious reform movement that began among German Lutherans in the 17th century. It emphasized personal faith against the main Lutheran Church's perceived stress on doctrine and theology over Christian living. So this Pietism started in the 17th century, parallel to Enlightenment, and then led to Sturm und Drang. If you are interested in Pietism, you can read more about it from websites, so just Google it up, because this is a significant religious movement in the German history and German literary history as well. Klopstock is an important figure and has influenced the writing of Goethe's Werther. For example, the scene at the ball after the storm is similar to Klopstock's the Ode called Die Frühlingsfeier, the spring celebration. So Goethe took several elements from Klopstock, for example, the lightning, the thunder, the strong nature, on page 43, where after he met Lotte and danced with her, there was this thunderstorm, and that comes from Klopstock. And on page 43 is where you can see Goethe mentioning Klopstock. And Lotte actually knows Klopstock. Another influence was Shakespeare. He was the great role model for Goethe and other Sturm und Drang writers. And he was appreciated by Germans 150 years later. So his works were translated into German, and Shakespeare's works were suddenly appreciated in their elemental beauty. He was like a natural force. He was powerful and emotional depth on a completely different level. And Goethe wrote a speech for Shakespeare in 1771. It's called Zum Shakespearstag, dedicated to Shakespeare. And in this speech he said that we are more related to the English than the French. We should emulate the English. And it was Goethe who first discovered Shakespeare. Before that, Shakespeare's work were not very well received because his works broke the three unities of action, time, and place. And they said that he's crazy, we don't want him. But then Goethe was the one who first discovered the beauty in Shakespeare's writing. Another influence is this very important man, the French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He wrote 3 very important books in just 12 months. And one of the books is called On the Social Contract. So Goethe's enthusiasm for the ideas of this French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who was one of the most important representatives of the French Enlightenment, and he had a great influence on the philosophical thought in Germany. He is, with his ideas, also one of the preparers of the French Revolution. And he argues in his book that man is indeed born free, but is in chains like a slave because of the society. In the other book, Discourse on Inequality, he criticized that by the organization of work in modern society, the cornerstone of social inequality is set. So a few enrich themselves in the work of many people who do not receive the just rewards. And with their wealth, those few promote the political structures that establish this exploitation relationship politically. And if you look at Werther, on the bottom of page 27 to 28, you see how this fits in with what Rousseau said in this book. So Goethe is very much influenced by Rousseau. Another book that Rousseau wrote is extremely revolutionary, and that's about the raising of children. So in this book, Rousseau claims that children are born pure and blameless, but are corrupted and spoiled only by society. So children have to learn by experience before they are strongly influenced at an early age by the teachers and teachings. So for Werther, in the book that you're reading, children embody the purity of nature. For example, on page 46, you see how Werther reacts to children and what he writes about children. This is very much influenced by Rousseau. This book, called Emile, was immediately banned after it was published. So for Rousseau, he divided this up and said that nature is an important part of education. That in addition to people and things, nature is the third teacher, which people are committed to a lifetime. And the childhood phase is characterized by the claim of the child to his own right, which can be seen in the context of the natural law, so that it propagates a well-ordered liberty. This freedom Werther claimed as well as an adult, and therefore Werther envies the children of their natural right. For adults, this freedom is offset by the obligation to integrate into society and to serve among others. And therefore, this comparison can be held, which also includes the idea of the genius, which is the children have the inborn genius, whereas adults have to create art by rules. And all of this comes up in Werther a lot. So, in a nutshell, the point that Rousseau wants to make is that culture corrupts, civilization corrupts. We have to go back to nature and true feeling. But what does he mean by that? That doesn't mean that we should go back into the woods and gather berries. But what it means is that we should be able to feel naturally, to feel truly. Wahrfühlen is the German word that is very significant during the time of Rousseau and Goethe. So Jean-Jacques Rousseau, his ideas in these works, these three books, really shook the 18th century Europe and led to the French Revolution. We can say that